Hey folks, I'm always looking for new Metroidvanias to try, so you can imagine my enthusiasm when I heard about Halberd Studios' 9 Years of Shadows, an aesthetically appealing addition to the genre. With review copy in hand, I dived in so I could answer the question, did it leave me yearning for more years, or was it overshadowed by its peers? I'm your host Arlyeon, let's find out together. 9 years ago, a dread curse was unleashed, draining color from the lands and leaving madness and desolation in its wake. And yet, some brave souls still remain, pushing forward despite the oppressive magic which strangles the world. Amongst these is Europa, a warrior who plunges headlong into the castle which lay at the origin of the problem. Yet, within moments, she finds herself outmatched. Only through the intervention of a strange spirit does she survive, gaining the opportunity to delve into the mysteries behind the curse. It is admittedly a bit weird that within a short chunk of time, I've bumped into a pair of games whose overarching premise is the world became noir and then things started to suck. Still, beyond that shallow comparison, the two games do feel narratively distinct, both insofar as the actual content of their stories and the way they chose to tell it. For instance, everything you need to know and everything you're going to know for a good chunk of time is covered by the game's opening cutscene. Global curse, castle's the key, murder enough things, and maybe it will get fixed. It actually takes the game a fair amount of time to really gear up and begin to explore the circumstances surrounding the curse. And to a certain degree, this works because it instead provides room for the game to focus on Europa. The loading screens, which take the form of elevator rides between the areas, serve as brief pauses from the action where she can reflect on her past or the current situation. There's also a few NPCs that she can chat with, though that's part of where certain cracks in 9 Years' approach to storytelling begins to occur. Early on, we're introduced to a spirit who only communicates vis-a-vis a specific sound effect. Here's the thing, though. Europa can understand him just fine and communicate back with him, so the only person left of the loop here is you. It's a fundamentally weird decision, almost like watching a Pokemon trainer trying to hold a serious conversation with their Mon as it blurbles empathetically in their direction.
Pika, pika, pika.
Yes, you still get the relative gist of the conversation based on her responses to it, but it just seems an odd choice. That's not my only quibble either. Europa will also find herself gradually discovering a series of band members scattered throughout the castle. This is in itself a little odd, but the real head scratcher for me was the series of side quests they send you on, since the goal is to essentially kill a number of mini-bosses. Here's the thing though, these enemies are disjointed from the areas and overall narrative. Injected in as either a reference to classic games, I'm looking at you Reaper Boss, or just someone's OC. Quite frankly, out of the quests the band sends you on, there was only one of them that actually felt like a meaningful part of the game's narrative, which is saying something when it's the orchestra's quest that not only obliges you to fight that one, but 3 others. Also, while there is a bestiary that provides lore tidbits, it's the mini-bosses that get entries instead of the story-centric bosses. And it's not just the side content that left me squinting either. While I don't necessarily mind the idea of plot elements being inferred rather than spelled out, I would like them to be fleshed out. For instance, it took the game mentioning that the castle you're romping through is built on or in a giant to really figure that out, which sort of highlights how irrelevant it feels both as an environmental detail and the plot at large. I mean, yes, it does serve as an excuse for the existence of lore stones scattered throughout the game, some of which are hidden, but they are largely prosaic. Also, this isn't the crux of my complaints insofar as plot points or world details being glossed over either. While my abhorrence of spoilers does mean I won't get into actual details, there were more than a few times where the story references past events or relationships without ever really clarifying them. And this frustrates me because I want to know more about the world and about Europa. It's a fun story, but there's just so much that feels unrealized or simply clipped. But this has been a whole tangent, so let's get to the goods gameplay-wise. And given that this is a Metroidvania, I may as well kick things off with its exploration. Admittedly, this is a bit of an odd duck. See, while this game is a Metroidvania, there's an odd sense of linearity to the matter. Sure, it provides you the ability to wander off the main course for a room or two, or to break down a wall in order to unearth a secret, but by and large the game directs players along a fairly specific path, which doesn't offer much in the way of deviation. Perhaps the lengthiest bits of exploration on my part was the pursuit of shortcuts to connect the castle, though that was more to get back to the central hub rather than any real need to facilitate future backtracking. It's really saying something when the area I had the most real reason to wander around was the starting area. And what I mean there, by the way, is that once you've acquired the movement abilities tied to a given zone, there's literally nothing stopping you from grabbing pretty much everything in the area, and then forgetting it exists entirely. Something which is further enabled by the map quite literally showcasing every secret exit in a room, which more than makes up for the inability to place markers. On one hand, it does mean that a diligent explorer won't have to engage with several elevators worth of loading screens or long backtracks due to a lack of fast travel. On the other hand, this also means that stages aren't really built with your new movement abilities in mind, which makes things feel rather lacking if you do wind up missing something and need to revisit these areas. Again, the hub is an exception to this, but then you're funneled into it repeatedly over the course of the game. And honestly, this is a bit of a shame overall, because there are a lot of fun movement abilities. Sure, there's the basic double jump, but the real fun starts once it introduces you to the armor system. Well, discounting the initially acquired lightning armor, since it only enables you to activate switches color-coded to it, but the other ones do provide some neat options. The water armor, for instance, allows you to dive into deep waters, and eventually swim in it freely through an alternate form you can toggle. Likewise, both the fire and earth armor help you navigate other, more hazardous biomes, and each has an additional upgrade that further opens up the ways that you can interact with exploration beyond simply enduring a type of obstacle. The late game platforming segments that ask you to rapidly make use of the various armor abilities in sequence were some of the best moments for me in 9 years. Except that those armor abilities, as fun as they are extremely contextual, which simply makes them incompatible with early segments of the game. And while you'd think they'd at least provide more options insofar as combat, well, no they do not. While you do get a full quinte of outfits by the end of the game, the initial 4 are almost identical insofar as combat options. Yes, the water outfit's mermaid form does enable you to do a rapid dash, but this is very specifically limited to areas full of water, once more leaving it as a hyper-specific ability. Likewise, the fire armor technically provides you the ability to make a small aerial explosion to do slight damage and reset your jump. Except it also requires a very specific environmental effect, which leaves all of them relying on your primary moveset, namely a light attack combo, a heavy attack, and a charge attack that you'll unlock fairly early on. And that will quite literally be the bread and butter of your arsenal for the crux of the game. This is then further compounded by the fact that your relative combat strength stays fairly consistent for vast swaths of 9 years. In fact, the only contribution your armors actually have in combat is the ability to ignore shields if you match your elemental color to one, and to effectively double your damage against an enemy if it has an elemental affinity. So, if it lacks one, you're mostly just picking an outfit for fashion since it changes your appearance and the attack animations. Though sometimes it's less a matter of picking and more it's just the outfit you're stuck with, since the game will automatically swap you to a given armor if you find yourself within its environment. Small note, you may have noticed that I said your attack power stays fairly consistent, and that's because there are collectible items you can get which will empower each outfit. Albeit only once, and with the gain primarily being a subtle damage boost that only really shines if a given enemy has a weakness to it. Really, the most interesting part of your offensive arsenal is your ghost friend, which provides you ranged attacks so long as you have light to fire shots off. Why is this interesting? Because the light meter also doubles as a shield, soaking damage from enemies and providing a buffer for your extremely meager health points. By default, you'll die in 2 hits without light, and even when maxed out, it'll only take 4 to put you in the ground, which makes a savvy use of positioning and the dodge button paramount. Still, while your health only recovers when you reach save points, your light has substantially more options. For instance, so long as you have meter, you can regain light by hitting an enemy, allowing you to swiftly make a recovery if you play smart. That said, even if it bottoms out, you still have options. One of them is a channeled ability where you take a few moments to hug your bear, and provided nothing hits you, you'll regain a good portion of your light. That said, the most powerful option is an unlock you acquire later, which enables you to recover your entire light bar when it empties, as long as you can time a button press. The latter ability, if mastered, goes a long way towards allowing a certain degree of recklessness, or even just providing an opportunity to recover in an encounter that would otherwise disable you from doing just that. Well, until the game takes that from you and grants you a more offense-oriented ability set instead. It was a bit of an adjustment, and one I'm glad was late game specific because the bosses are rough. Less so the mini-bosses, though I'm sure if I'd waited until later I'd be eating my words, and more so the story bosses. They will legitimately test how well you've learned the abilities associated with the various armors, and will just kill you dead for any sloppiness on your part. If you're a fan of difficulty, they'll do the trick. Also, the fact that the grand majority require you to open up their weak spots in order to do any real damage disables you from simply blitzing past the encounters. Still, as mixed as my feelings have been so far, there is one element that is utterly unassailable, and that's the visual design. Everything from the areas, the enemies, the NPCs, and even the care taken for Europa's armors and the subtle differences in how her attacks look, despite how they're functionally identical, is really neat. Also, the music is a great accompaniment to the experience. There's just something soothing about so much of it, save for the moments when it decides you need to get beaten up by a boss. But yeah, this has been going on for a bit, so now is a good time to draw things to a close, and the conclusion I ultimately came to was this: 9 Years of Shadows is a competent game. The story, such as it is fun enough, and still has twists I wasn't expecting. Likewise, in part that's because of how it was told. What's more, I enjoyed the experience of going through it. The platforming was decent, and the boss encounters certainly felt climatic, even if a few of the mini-bosses felt more like health sponges than anything else. In part because of their more limited movesets. That said, the combat itself felt limiting, like an overall missed opportunity where the key element is simply color swapping for damage rather than any meaningful differences. What's more, if you're specifically looking for a Metroidvania, this game does pale compared to some of its peers, in part due to the more linear nature of the game and the somewhat limited scope insofar as exploration. Still, if that doesn't dissuade you, I still found it a good time and worth the experience of beating it, so I can ultimately call it a hit, albeit with some stipulations. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you have something to say, leave a comment, and if you enjoy my efforts to create new indie reviews and interviews, hit the subscribe button and the bell. For a link to my Discord, the Crit Hit Cauldron, check the description. There's also a link to my Patreon if you want to see reviews early, or just want to support the channel, and to my merch house for neat swag like Crit Hit coffee mugs. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.